Okay, we are being recorded. How is everyone? It's good to see you all. Good. Any questions? Julia, your screen lit up. Do you have a question? Okay, Paul then?
Yeah, so for the annotated bibliography, the syllabus says it's due the 5th, which I believe is Sunday.
Mm-hmm.
Do you
Yeah.
still want that for Sunday, or
How
do you
about Monday?
Monday?
How about Monday the 6th? Okay. We will not use the Sabbath day. Any other questions? Good. Okay. And if I understand correctly, then the other remaining thing is two remaining things. One is the paper you're doing on a primary source, and I should have returned to you your drafts. So if not, let me know. And that's due, I think, the 17th. And then also we have one more class discussion, presentation, debate, and that is coming up. And we have a choice, I guess, of either doing it this week or next week. I should actually ask those who are on the list, who have not yet presented. And I have Ahmed, Skylar, Tessa, Chloe, Anthony, Kelsey Ortiz, Kelly Richardson, and Leah are on the next group presenting. So let me know if this Wednesday will work, or if you would rather do it next Monday or Wednesday, and we will look forward to wrapping this up. I was just looking at the syllabus and realized that I'm ahead of where I thought we would be. And so I didn't think we would get into the Jefferson administration. So here we are. And are there any other questions, either substantive or pertaining to what you have to do? Let's see. Skylar, okay. Yeah, okay, let me see. Okay, that's fine. And other questions, thoughts? Just one person says next week. So, okay, that'll give us all more time. Good. So I will send out a reminder to you, and we can talk about the possible topics for discussion in the Jefferson administration. I think, where did we leave off last time? It's been a long time, I know. It's been a week since we've been together. And I know you're probably a lot like me and spending most of your time thinking about the Constitution and the Jefferson administration and what's happening in this most interesting period in history. Any thoughts on or memories? Or yes, Paul?
Yeah, so the last place that I remember us leaving off was Jefferson and Burr just tied with 71 electoral votes each, and Adams only got 69.
Yeah, okay. So what happens next? There's anyone other than Paul. When under the Constitution, what happens if there is a tie in the electoral vote? Yes, Giovanni.
The House of Representatives decides who becomes the president. There's a tie.
Right. Yes. Okay. So in this case, though they don't get free choice, they have to choose from between the two who are tied. If it's a case where no one has a majority, then they have more leeway. So in this case, and does anyone recall exactly how the House chooses? Yes, Jovan, is your hand still up?
This is my hand coming back. I'm
Okay,
not
good.
100% sure, but I'm pretty sure the House does a ballot and they all
Yes.
vote to see between the two.
So, and does every member of the House have a vote, or is it some other way they vote?
I'm not sure. I think it's every member, but I'm not personally sure.
Okay, so if you ever find yourself in this situation, you would probably want to look at the Constitution to see what exactly it says. And let me see if I can find this quickly. This would be in section 2, where it talks about Article 2, where it talks about the president. And let me see. Okay. if there be more than one who have such a majority and have an equal number of votes, so you have more than, so they're anticipating, you could conceivably have two candidates who get a majority and they might be tied. And then the House of Representatives shall immediately choose by ballot one of them for president. And if no person have a majority, then from the 5 highest on the list, the said House shall in like manner choose the president. But in choosing the president, the votes shall be taken by states, the representation from each state having 1 vote. So every state has 1 vote when the House of Representatives is choosing a president. And so that's, and in every case, after the choice of the president, the person having the greatest number of votes for the elector shall be vice president. But if there should remain 2 or more who have equal votes, the Senate shall choose from them by ballot the vice president. So the House of Representatives chooses the president, each state having 1 vote. And in this case, it is the Congress that had been elected in 1798, which was an overwhelmingly Federalist Congress. And so there are more Federalists in Congress than there are Republicans. And you may say, so what's the big deal? The 2 candidates they get to choose from are both Republicans. So why would it matter who these Federalists or Republicans in Congress vote for? Well, it turns out a lot of the Federalists were much more comfortable with the idea of Aaron Burr being president than Thomas Jefferson. Jefferson, they knew to be this mad ideologue. Now, Jefferson wrote 1 book in the course of his life, and it was called Notes on the State of Virginia. And he said all kinds of things that were found outrageous at the time. I should say some things he said are found outrageous in our time, but that's a subject for another day. I mean, we could spend the rest of the, actually, we could spend a whole semester talking about Thomas Jefferson and the various things he said and did during his life. And maybe one of you will be inspired to do a Jefferson musical where he will come off better than he did in the Hamilton musical. Surprisingly enough, a musical focusing on Hamilton has Jefferson look pretty bad. And also, by the way, the Tom Hanks's series, he produced the John Adams series and Jefferson also comes, a series focusing on John Adams. Jefferson also comes across looking pretty shabby. So I should ask you for your quick reactions to Thomas Jefferson. I mean, his statues are being removed all over the country, even as we speak. But I should say, eminent historian has pointed out that over the long course of American history, anyone who has bet against Thomas Jefferson has lost. So just something to remember. So anyway, it turns out the Federalists would be much more comfortable with President Aaron Burr, because Burr is, well, first, he's a politician, which means he'll be able to make deals, unlike Jefferson, who I think is an ideologue. And also, Burr is partly a New Englander. His grandfather was Jonathan Edwards, the great American theologian, had been president of Princeton, actually president of Princeton, minister up in Connecticut and Massachusetts during the Great Awakening. And his Burr's father, also named Aaron Burr, was also a Congregationalist minister, also president of Princeton. And Burr, as senator from New York, was someone who had the kind of sharp elbows you expect in politics and also an ability to make deals. So when the House begins its balloting, the Federalists almost all vote for Aaron Burr to be president. The Republicans vote for Jefferson. And this, you can imagine there might be pressure on one side, well, actually on these Republicans. Why not just go along with Burr, since he was good enough to be vice president? Why not make him president? It's kind of a dilemma because the House of Representatives has to choose. And it was kind of clear that the choice for president of the Republicans was Thomas Jefferson, well, I've just told you why now the Federalists would want Aaron Burr as president. Well, let me ask you this, and this is probably a question no one has asked you before. What would you do if you were Aaron Burr? Yes, Jovan. Have you given this thought, by the way, what you would do if you were Aaron Burr and this situation presented itself?
Not particularly.
Okay.
I can't say I've never like had like the passing notion of it, but I've never given it significant thought. But if I was Aaron Burr, I mean, this is probably my best chance to be president, just out of nowhere.
Sure.
Sure, I'm going to be vice president, and this probably isn't going to be the best for a cohesive cabinet if I try to strike it big against Jefferson. But I mean, Jefferson's been vice president before. He'll probably be fine. This is probably my biggest shot. So I'd at least see how it goes. I probably wouldn't go out and say, yes, definitely pick me. Anyone who picks Jefferson, I hate you forever. But
usually in politics, it's not a good idea. In politics, it's usually not a good idea to say, I hate you forever. A politician I know says that what does he say? The toes you step on this morning might be connected to the ass you have to kiss this afternoon. So just remember that. But yeah. But anyway, I can see your point. You can see an opportunity here. I don't know if you're done yet, Jovan, with your acceptance speech, but
that was it.
Okay, yeah, that's good. Okay, so yeah, you see the opportunity now, which might not come again. And yes, Paul.
Yeah, so I think the gentlemanly thing to do in this situation is to like decline and be like, I will take vice president. Jefferson can be president, because that was the pre-arranged agreement between the two. But yeah, I kind of agree with Jovan. I'd be like, we'll see how it goes. We'll see if I become president or not.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I should also point out the vice president didn't have a whole lot to do. He presided over the Senate. Washington had kept Adams at a distance. Adams had kept Jefferson at a distance. And actually, that's putting it mildly. He never consulted with Jefferson about anything. So the idea is these are separate entities. And so it's not like if Burr is vice president or Jefferson, he's going to have a whole lot to do with the president or vice versa. So yeah, I should say Burr doesn't step forward and say, yeah, make me president, nor does he decline. He doesn't say, no, everyone was voting for me to be vice president. Jefferson's the one we voted for to be president. And as you can imagine, that's not something that Jefferson's never going to say, I hate you forever. But it is, if Jefferson ultimately is elected, going to color the relationship. And that is, so anyway, Burr doesn't do anything to make Congress think he won't accept the job. And so the Federalists keep voting for him, and the Republicans keep voting for Jefferson. Jefferson gets the votes of 8 states. Burr gets the votes of 6. And then I'm trying to remember how many states there are at the time. I think there were 15. And so you have this, because each state has 1 vote. And so in some states where the Federalists have a majority of the congressional delegation, they're voting for Burr. All of the New England states, plus Delaware, Maryland, South Carolina, voting for Aaron Burr. And then the other states where the Republicans have a majority are voting for Jefferson. And this goes on actually for 36 ballots. You know, they start voting immediately. This is at the beginning of March. And by the way, the vice president, of course, is the presiding officer when the House counts the electoral votes. And so Vice President Jefferson had counted the votes and then announced that it was a tie between Mr. Jefferson and Mr. Burr. And then what happened next, of course, was beyond his control, as each side was jockeying. And the real leader among the Republicans was Albert Gallatin, who was the leader of the Republicans in Congress, making sure that everyone stays with Jefferson and doesn't start defecting. And meanwhile, there are things going on apparently behind the scenes. No one really writes down exactly what happened, but on the 36th ballot, there are 2 congressmen from Vermont, as you'll recall. One of them is our friend Matthew Lyon, and he, of course, is a Republican. reelected after being in jail for violating the Sedition Act. And the other is a Federalist, and the Federalist does not vote on the 36th ballot. He casts a blank ballot, which means Vermont goes for Jefferson. Similarly, in Delaware, there's one congressman from Delaware, then as now, and he also casts a blank ballot. And then in Maryland, the Federalist congressmen, they can't vote for Jefferson, but they simply cast blank ballots. So Maryland and Vermont go for Jefferson, and thus he is elected president on the 18th of February. Remember, the presidential term starts on the 4th of March. So this is 2 weeks, 3 weeks when we don't know again who is going to be chosen as president. And the House is having a couple of these sessions every day where they are voting. And then at the very end, the House of Representatives chooses Jefferson. And Gallatin at the end said that this was the maddest scheme of the Federalists of all, that is, trying to change the result of the election to get someone they could work with instead of the person that the Republicans had proposed. And the Federalists can say, oh no, you proposed two people, one for president, one for both of them for president. We're just picking one of them. So complicated story. And it doesn't leave us feeling really easy about whether Jefferson's inauguration is going to go off without a hitch. I mean, if the Federalists are going to do this, who knows what else might be in store. So actually, the governors of Pennsylvania and of Virginia had their militia on standby in case someone tried something on March 4th to prevent Jefferson from taking office. Now, meanwhile, at the White House, which President Adams has just recently moved into, and now he is preparing to move out, he is very busy in these weeks nominating various people to federal judgeships and other positions. We'll be talking more about this later. And Adams is not going to stick around on March 4th. He does not attend the inauguration. He's on his way, and it's unclear what will happen on Inauguration Day. And what we do know is this, that actually Chief Justice Marshall, just recently confirmed as Chief Justice, begins a letter in the morning, and he says that the Democrats are divided between speculative theorists and absolute terrorists. And he says, with the latter, I am not inclined to place Mr. Jefferson. By the way, there is a 19th century biography of Marshall, and the guy who wrote it really hated Jefferson, so actually changed it. So Marshall was saying, with the latter, I am inclined to place Mr. Jefferson. So he has Marshall actually calling him a terrorist. Marshall, by the way, really didn't like Jefferson. They are distant cousins. They knew each other. They're both lawyers from Virginia. And I suppose if there were a John Marshall musical, Jefferson also would come across pretty badly, as would, I suppose, Andrew Jackson. But I leave that to those of you who are going to be writing these musicals. So you have Marshall then going to the Capitol building to inaugurate Jefferson as president. And Jefferson left his boarding house. He was staying at a boarding house as vice president, and he walks to the Capitol building, and he goes in, and before the houses of Congress, this again, same Congress that had been elected in 1798, the same Congress that had been trying to prevent him, about half the members trying to prevent him from becoming president. And by the way, the Federalists did have a majority, so actually more of them had been voting for Burr than for Jefferson, even though because of the state delegations, Jefferson carried more states. So think about this moment. You've had this election in which, until the very end, it wasn't clear who was going to win. And it wasn't just because these folks didn't like Jefferson's policies. They thought he was going to destroy the country. And so here he is now giving his inaugural speech before this group, and knowing the speech also is meant for a wider audience. And in the course of our history, we've had, probably about 80, upwards of 80, maybe 90 at this time, inaugural speeches. And of those, only 4 are really worth looking at. And one of them, and the first one, is Jefferson's. So I will share some of it with you now for those who have not taken it to heart. So during the contest of opinion through which we have passed, the animation of discussions and of exertions has sometimes worn an aspect which might impose on strangers, unused to think freely and to speak and to write what they think. But this being now decided by the voice of the nation, announced according to the rules of the Constitution, all will, of course, arrange themselves under the will of the law and unite in common efforts for the common good. All too will bear in mind this sacred principle, that though the will of the majority is in all cases to prevail, that will, to be reasonable, to be rightful, must be reasonable, that the minority possess their equal rights, which equal law must protect, and to violate which would be oppression. Let us then, fellow citizens, unite with one heart and one mind. Let us restore to social intercourse that harmony and affection without which liberty and even life itself are but dreary things. And let us reflect that having banished from our land that religious intolerance under which mankind so long bled and suffered, we have yet gained little if we countenance a political intolerance as despotic, as wicked, and capable of as bitter and bloody persecutions. During the throes and convulsions of the ancient world, during the agonizing spasms of infuriated man seeking through blood and slaughter his long-lost liberty, it was not wonderful that the agitation of the billows should reach even this distant and peaceful shore, that this should be more felt and feared by some and less by others, and should divide opinions as to measures of safety. But every difference of opinion is not a difference of principle. We have called by different names brethren of the same principle. We are all Republicans. We are all Federalists. If there be any among us who would wish to dissolve this union or to alter its Republican form, let them stand undisturbed as monuments of the safety with which error of opinion may be tolerated, where reason is left free to combat it. I know indeed that some honest men fear that a Republican government cannot be strong, that this government is not strong enough. But would the honest patriot in the full tide of successful experiment abandon a government which has so far kept us free and firm on the theoretic and visionary fear that this government, the world's best hope, may by possibility want energy to preserve itself? I trust not. I believe this, on the contrary, the strongest government on earth. I believe it the only one where every man at the call of the law would fly to the standard of the law and would meet invasions of the public order as his own personal concern. Sometimes it is said that man cannot be trusted with the government of himself. Can he then be trusted with the government of others? Or have we found angels in the form of kings to govern him? Let history answer this question. And then he goes on to talk about the particular things he will do, but I think we'll just take a moment to look at this. So this contest of opinion through which we have passed is this contentious presidential election. And people unused to this might be surprised at the way people here can speak freely and can think and speak and write what they think. So we've had this big contest, and now it's been decided according to the rules of the Constitution. So now all will arrange themselves under the law and make common efforts for the common good. And then he reminds us that the will of the majority is in all cases to prevail, but the minority have equal rights, which equal laws protect, and violating that would be oppression. So it's a reminder to those who have lost the election that they maintain their equal rights. That is a balance. But then it's more than that. It's more than just tolerating this bad administration for 4 years. It's restoring to this social relationships, that harmony and affection which they need. We've drawn these political lines between Federalists and Republicans and not socializing with one another, treating the other as the enemy. But we should not do that. We need to restore to our social intercourse that harmony and affection, without which liberty and even life are dreary things. And then he reminds us that having banished religious intolerance, we don't want to have a political intolerance that is looking to make sure people agree with us politically. And political intolerance, he reminds us, is as capable of persecuting the minority as is religious intolerance. Then the throes and convulsions of the ancient world. He's not talking about Greece and Rome. He's talking about France. He's talking about the war happening in Europe. And the French Revolution is infuriated man seeking through blood and slaughter his long lost liberty. So Jefferson sees the French Revolution as generally a good thing because it is infuriated man seeking through blood and slaughter his long lost liberty. But then it was not wonderful, that is not to be wondered at, that agitation should reach even here, this distant and peaceful shore. And this divided our opinions as to how to protect ourselves. Some people were more fearful of it than others. That is, the Federalists reacted more strongly to this than did the Republicans. But he points out these are differences of opinion, not differences of principle. We are all Republicans. We're all Federalists. What do you think he means by that? Yes, Jovan.
That despite the party names, they're all still either Federalists or Republicans in terms of how they view the national government. Like, even though the Federalists call themselves Federalists, I guess while they don't really like the term democracy, the government is still rather Republican and they support it.
Yeah.
Like, it kind of goes beyond the name of the party. Also, I think he's like doing like a unifying speech where he's saying, we're all every party. We're all the same American people.
Yeah, I think you're right. And by the way, in some of the texts you will see of this, Federalist and Republican are capitalized. I think in his original draft, they're not. So he is thinking of these as the terms which have divided us. And then the next sentence, if there should be any among us who would wish to dissolve this union, that's what the Federalists said the Republicans wanted to do, or alter its Republican form. The Republicans always accuse the Federalists of wanting to establish a monarchy. So the Federalists say you want to dissolve the Union, the Republicans say you want to establish a monarchy. And he says, if there should be any among us who would want to do these things, let them stand undisturbed as monuments of the safety with which error of opinion may be tolerated where reason is left free to combat it. So we're not going to have a sedition act now against the Federalists, against those who disagree with the administration. We're simply going to let people stand undisturbed. The safety with which error of opinion may be tolerated where reason is left free to combat it. This is a great sentiment about letting us argue about these things, not saying, well, I know I am right, therefore you're forbidden to say anything. I know it may seem like that in this particular class, that I know I'm right and you can't disagree, but that's actually not what I think, no matter what I do. Okay. And then some honest men fear that a Republican government cannot be strong. That is, they think government's going to be too weak. It needs more power. But then he asks if an honest patriot, he uses that term honest twice here, honest men, honest patriot, in the full tide of successful experiment, will they abandon this government on the theoretic and visionary fear? Again, one of the two words Jefferson's opponents used most often against him were theoretic and visionary. And by the way, typically someone who is called a visionary in this time. It wasn't a good thing. I know now people running for office always want to have some vision. Back in this century, if someone had visions, we would think it was a sign of mental illness, and we wouldn't vote for you because you're a visionary, or you're a theorist. You don't understand the real world, but you have theories about how it should operate. So it's a good way of turning this epithet used against him on on those who attacked him. And then he does call this government the world's best hope. What do you think he means by that? This government, the world's best hope. Yes, Matt.
I believe he's basically equating the experiment of creating the United States and this Republican form of government is basically, I mean, it's going into a lot of the philosophical and ideological views of America as being like this moment in time, this point in history where the new governments of and for the people are going to succeed or fail depending on how America goes going forward.
Right. Okay. Yeah. By the way, this is this address. He gives it in the before Congress. Very few people can hear him. Jefferson was a terrible public speaker, but it is printed in newspapers and it circulates in that way. And a lot of these phrases are going to come back. Abraham Lincoln loved that phrase, the world's best hope. And it's one that has a certain resonance, a long time resonance. But you did a good job explaining it, so I don't need to say anything more. And then it might want energy to preserve itself. And then he says, Jefferson, by the way, his rhetorical style was to have these wonderful rhetorical questions, which don't need an answer, but he gives them. So this is actually a rhetorical question. Would the honest patriot in the full tide of successful experiment abandon this government on these visionary and theoretic fears? I trust not. Okay. But then he goes on to say, I believe it the strongest government on earth. It's the only one where every man at the call of the law will fly to the standard of the law and will meet violations of the public order as his own personal concern. So you don't need the provisional army that the Adams administration had created or the huge apparatus of the state. What you have instead are citizens who will respond to the call of the law and will meet violations of the public order, not as something that's the responsibility of someone else, but it is their responsibility. That's really the critical difference between Jefferson's view of the world and the view of, well, Hamilton, to put it one way. So it's a different way of looking at how the government operates. And then the last question about man can't be trusted with the government of himself. I mean, look at the people around us and think, do you really want them running the country? And except for the 2 times a week I'm with this particular group, I'm generally saying no. But then what's the alternative? Angels in the forms of kings. That's we haven't found them yet. So this is it's a wonderful philosophical statement, and it's going to become actually the basic frame of the basic political frame the country will have for the next half century or more. It's one reason why Joe Ellis has said anyone who bets against Jefferson loses, because Jefferson understands something here about the nature of the American polity. Now, it's probably worth it to go on with this particular address, where he does talk more specifically about what to expect. Kindly separated, well, he says, with courage and confidence, let us pursue our own federal and republican principles, our attachment to union and representative government, these 2 different things. kindly separated by nature and a wide ocean from the exterminating havoc of 1/4 of the globe, too high-minded to endure the degradations of the others, possessing a chosen country with room enough for our descendants to the 1,000th and 1,000th generation. Now imagine that at this time, remember, the country's western border was the Mississippi River. But Jefferson saw this as a country with enough room for us to the 1,000th and 1,000th generation, entertaining a due sense of our equal right to the use of our own faculties, to the acquisitions of our own industry, to honor and confidence from our fellow citizens resulting not from birth, but from our actions and their sense of them, enlightened by a benign religion, professed indeed and practiced in various forms, yet all of them inculcating honesty, truth, temperance, gratitude, and the love of man, acknowledging and adoring and overruling providence, which by all its dispensations proves that it delights in the happiness of man here and his greater happiness hereafter. With all these blessings, what more is necessary to make us a happy and prosperous people? Wait, anyone have any ideas? What more is necessary? You have all this: chosen country, benign religion. What more do we need? We don't have titles. That is, we expect respect from our fellows, not because of who our ancestors were, but because of what we've done. It sounds like, you don't really need anything else here. Yes, Matthew.
Well, if we're talking about things that, what else could we ask for? We could ask for the full abolition of slavery and stopping the slave trade. Just an idea.
Okay, that's a specific. Okay, he's speaking more generally here. Okay, you had to bring up slavery. Okay, and of course, in that chosen country with room enough for our descendants, someone's going to point out, well, there already were people there who had been there for the 1,000th and 1,000th generation. What about them? Okay, Matthew, I think, would have been one of the Federalists, kind of sitting there, shaking his head about Jefferson. And okay, he does say there's one more thing we need: a wise and frugal government, which shall restrain men from injuring one another, otherwise leave them free to regulate their own pursuits of industry and improvement, and not take from the mouth of labor the bread it has earned. This is the sum of good government, and this is necessary to close the circle of our felicities. So you have all this stuff. What you next need is a wise and frugal government, and that government's job is to prevent people from hurting each other, otherwise leave them alone. And not by taking from the mouth of labor the bread it has earned. He's not talking about slavery. He is, though, talking about taxes that are going to take from you what you have earned in order to support a bloated government, the opposite of the wise and frugal government. And then he does go on, and let me see, since we're on this particular roll, okay. About to enter on the exercise of duties which comprehend everything dear and valuable to you, it is proper you should understand what I deem the essential principles of government. And by the way, I'm just checking to see if I have the final page of this, which I might have placed somewhere as I was trying to memorize it. Actually, 1 second. Okay. About to enter, fellow citizens, on the exercise of duties which comprehend everything of value to you, it is proper you should understand what I deem the essential principles of our government. Okay. And consequently, those which ought to shape its administration. I will compress them within the narrowest compass they will bear, stating the general principle, but not all of its limitations. Okay, so this is it. This is the general principles Jefferson has about on which the government will be operating. Equal and exact justice to all men of whatever state or persuasion, religious or political. Peace, commerce, and honest friendship with all nations, entangling alliances with none. The support of the state governments in all their rights as the most competent administrations for our domestic concerns and the surest bulwarks against anti-republican tendencies. The preservation of the general government in its whole constitutional vigor as the sheet anchor of our peace at home and safety abroad. A jealous care of the right of election by the people, a mild and safe corrective of abuses which are lopped by the sword of revolution where peaceable remedies are unprovided. Absolute acquiescence in the decisions of the majority, the vital principle of republics, from which is no appeal but to force, the vital principle and immediate parent of despotism. A well-disciplined militia, our best reliance in peace and for the first moments of war till regulars may relieve them. The supremacy of the civil over the military authority. Economy in the public expense, that labor may be lightly burdened. The honest payment of our debts and sacred preservation of the public faith. Encouragement of agriculture and of commerce as its handmaid, the diffusion of information and arraignment of all abuses at the bar of public reason, freedom of religion, freedom of the press, and freedom of person under the protection of habeas corpus, and trial by juries impartially selected. These principles form the bright constellation which has gone before us and guided our steps through an age of revolution and reformation. The wisdom of our sages and blood of our heroes have been devoted to their attainment. They should be the creed of our political faith, the text of civic instruction, the touchstone by which to try the services of those we trust. And should we wander from them in moments of error or of alarm, let us hasten to retrace our steps and to regain the road which alone leads to peace, liberty, and safety. So that's essentially what Jefferson is proposing to do, to restrain government, to lead the states will be the bulwark of domestic life. The federal government is the sheet anchor of our peace, of our stability and internet. Well, I could go on. The speech is almost ended, so you think I probably have gone on long enough. And then actually, the biggest thing the Jefferson administration is going to do is to establish economy in government. Remember, you've said so that labor may be lightly burdened. We will not take from the mouth of labor the bread it has earned. The federal budget in 1790, in 1800 was $3 million. In 1799, the Federalist had spent $6 million. This is during the war. And what Jefferson most wants to do is retire the national debt, which stands still at about $42 million. It's about where it was when Hamilton started his plan to fund the national debt. Hamilton really hadn't done that as a way of retiring the debt, but simply as servicing the debt. Jefferson wants to retire the debt. He wants to do it within 4 presidential administrations. So every year, the federal government takes in about $10 million, and that's all of the customs revenues, etc. The operating budget of the federal government is about $3 million. So Jefferson and his Secretary of the Treasury, and does anyone know who Jefferson's Secretary of the Treasury was? I actually have here on my desk prizes I will be giving out for those who are best able to answer these kinds of questions. And these actually come in the form of White House Christmas ornaments. So, beautiful ornament for your tree or whatever decorations you may use for whatever holidays you are observing. So actually this one's broken. I'll have to give you a better one if you are able to tell me who is Jefferson's Secretary of the Treasury. Actually, this is a good one. This is actually from the Nixon Presidential Library, and it's so no, the Secretary of the Treasury was not Elvis Presley. Someone even more notable. You can type it in if you know the answer. This is quite disappointing. One new message, let me see. I think a message came in, but now I can't get to it. Ah, yes, Kelsey. Kelsey, you are right. So I will get this to you. And by the way, Jovan, I saw your hand was up. There will be other opportunities to weigh in. As I said, I have more of these. Not Elvis Presley, unfortunately, but that one is Kelsey's. And okay, so Gallatin, his job then is to figure out how to retire the debt. And remember, every year, he figures we would have to spend about $7.5 million. We had been just paying the interest. Jefferson wants to retire the principal. And if you have debts, credit card debt, student loan debt, there's a minimum payment you have to make. And look on your credit card statement how long it will take you to pay this off. You should live so long. So Gallatin figures $7.5 million every year is what it would take to pay off the debt in 16 years. Federal government brings in about $10 million a year. Most of that is from customs revenue, about $9.5 million. The rest is in land sales, because the other big part of this is we're not going to raise taxes. The Jefferson administration didn't believe in internal taxes. We believed, yeah, you can have a tariff for revenue, but not internal taxes. So how then can we pay off the debt if we are not going to raise taxes? Okay, I have a number of ornaments here. Yes, Jovan.
You sell bonds. That's what you do.
That's well, actually, selling bonds is actually incurring more debt.
Oh yeah.
You sell, yeah. So that's I had true. An ornament here, but I'm sorry, not this time. Yes, Paul.
Selling more land on the frontier.
Well, that is one thing that could happen, I suppose. There isn't it's not an unlimited land supply. What do you think, class? Should Paul get one for suggesting something? Jovan says, okay, Paul, you get an ornament. Okay, good. Thank you, Jovan. Very, you weren't saving that one for you. Good. Okay. Well, yes, V.
Raise more taxes?
Actually, no, we're not going to raise taxes, and we're not going to borrow money. Raising taxes would be the easy way to do it, but that they've pledged not to raise taxes. In fact, in his second inaugural address, Jefferson is going to ask rhetorically, what farmer, what mechanic ever sees the face of a tax collector of the United States? Because his administration had in fact eliminated all taxes except the tariff. So where do they find more money to pay the debt? And it's a simple enough answer. I'm surprised. By the way, should V get an ornament for wanting to raise your taxes? Yeah, Matt's saying yes. He likes anyone who's going to say raise taxes. Okay, V, I've got one for you here too. Okay, so, well, the only thing you're going to be able to do is cut government spending more. As I said, $3 million is the operating budget of the United States. And let's see. So you're going to have to find more money there. So every year, the government is going to have an operating budget of about $2.5 million. So cutting that. And so the Army will get by on about $900,000 a year. And to do that, you're going to have to abandon some Army posts. We're also going to cut the spending for the Navy. Navies are very expensive things. So Jefferson actually has the idea, you can take these big frigates we built and take them apart and keep them in a shipyard. And if there ever is a war that requires them, we put them back together very quickly. And other ways of economizing. Also close some of the embassies that we've opened. And so we'll keep the ones in London, Paris, Berlin, and Madrid. Why do we need an embassy in Lisbon? And also, we're also going, there had been a proposal to send an ambassador to Russia. We're not going to do that right yet. Another thing we can do too is actually cut some of these judgeships that the Judiciary Act of 1801 had created. So in fact, the Republican Congress, which takes office in December of 1801, does pass a new Judiciary Act, which abolishes a lot of the judgeships created under the Judiciary Act of 1801. And as you'll recall, that Judiciary Act had been passed and a lot of the judgeships had gone to guys who had lost the elections in 1800. Now their jobs are eliminated. By the way, is it constitutional to eliminate jobs to eliminate judges' positions? And remember, if you're a judge whose position's been eliminated, you're probably going to have a good understanding of the law, and you're definitely going to think, no, it's not constitutional. They can't take my job. But is it? Does the Constitution say anything about judges' positions or salaries? Yes, Brittany.
Wasn't it that a judge would serve for life if they showed good behavior? So as long as they did they didn't do anything bad, that they would be serving for life.
That's true. Judges have life during good behavior. So that's one part of it. There is another piece of this, and I think Brittany, yes, you get an ornament. So anyone else have another constitutional thought on? Okay, the Constitution, Article 3 does say a judge's salary cannot be reduced during his tenure. So is eliminating the job reducing his salary? Yes, Jovan.
So in terms of the judge as a person, I guess, yes, his salary is being reduced. But in terms of the salary of the position, I would say no. There's just it's not that we're reducing the value of the salary. We're eliminating the salary.
Yeah.
Eliminating the position.
Okay.
So I want to say technically no. The salary of the position isn't being reduced because the position doesn't exist anymore. Therefore, there is no salary. It's not.
Okay.
But I guess for the person who is the judge getting the salary, their salary has been reduced. So I'm going to say yes and no.
I'm tempted to give you two ornaments for saying both yes and no. Trevor, you have an opinion on this?
I would say that it is reducing the salary. I think you would have to wait until that specific judge's tenure had ended, and then you could eliminate their position while it's unfilled. Okay. This is all helpful. And Trevor, you now have a Christmas tree ornament. So do you, Giovanni. Thank you. Good. So another thing that happened in 1801, the Judiciary Act, the one the Adams administration had passed, had created positions for 42 justices of the peace in the District of Columbia. And President Adams had actually just hours before leaving office, he had sat up late on the night before signing the commissions for these 42 justices of the peace, as well as other officials who are being given jobs as the administration was going out the door. And he had signed them. He then given them to the Secretary of State. And who was Adams's Secretary of State? Yes, Paul.
Was it Marbury or
No,
Madison?
no, neither Marbury nor Madison. Yes, Matt.
Didn't Adams have two Secretary of States? One was John Marshall and the other one was John Jay.
Well, you were right about one. You're right about the fact that he had two. The first was Timothy Pickering. The second is John Marshall. So Marshall, Secretary of State. Okay, and the way the process works is this. If you ever have received a commission from the federal government, it's signed, in this case by the president, and then the Secretary of State affixes the seal to it. So the commission is signed and sealed. And what is the third thing something needs in order to take effect? Signed, sealed. Yes, Javon.
Used to be mailed,
No.
or delivered, served.
Delivered. Yes.
There we go.
See, if you were a little older, you would immediately get that. Signed, sealed, delivered. Anyway, good. Just mailed isn't enough. Things get lost in the mail. So Marshall is not the most active guy, according to the story. And again, he's Secretary of State. And as I said, he leaves his desk to go off and inaugurate the president on March 4th. And then he's also Chief Justice. By the way, James Madison, whom Matt Jefferson appoints to be Secretary of State, doesn't show up for a while. He was dealing with his father had died. He's dealing with things in Virginia, et cetera, et cetera. I'm not trying to excuse any of this behavior, but Marshall has other things to do than go around Washington delivering these commissions to these various justices of the peace. If it was just mailing them, yeah, he would have no problem with that. Find a mailbox, but no. So they don't get delivered. And when James Madison does show up toward the end of the month, he finds that there's a stack of these commissions sitting on his desk, 42 justices of the peace. So he asks President Jefferson, what should we do with these? And Jefferson says, there's no way we need 42 justices of the peace. Oh, I see James Hicks had answered the question. So James, you get an ornament of one kind or another here. We'll have to figure out how to deliver these. So you have Jefferson says, no, you don't need 42 justices of the peace. What they do is they say, okay, we can probably get by with 30. And 23 of those are people that Adams had appointed to be justices of the peace. The others are people Jefferson appointed. And by the way, Jefferson's not firing everyone Adams had in place. He is simply looking for ways to economize. And so cutting a lot of these positions is one way of doing that. Okay, so one of the guys that knew he had been appointed a justice of the peace never gets his commission. And that guy's name was William Marbury. He's never in line to be Secretary of State, Chief Justice, anything like that. He's a justice of the peace. Anyone know what a justice of the peace then had more things to do than they do now? Anyone know what they do now? Yes, Javon.
I think they can still marry you.
Yeah, they can. Yeah.
And I think they do some domestic disputes.
Yeah. It's a judicial officer. Yes, Trevor.
I was just going to say the same thing.
Okay, good. Yeah, pretty much the same thing. Okay, so then they're somewhat more important, but still 42 in Washington would be a lot. And Marbury, though, knew he was supposed to become a justice of the peace. Commission never arrives. He begins to wonder where it is. So in December of 1801, so this is 7 months after he had been, he thought, appointed by President Adams. Well, no, it's more than that. March, it's 9 months, okay? He gets a lawyer. His lawyer is actually a guy named Lee, and Lee had been given a federal judgeship. He's now out of work because his judgeship had been eliminated, so he's practicing law. And Lee goes to the Supreme Court, because that is the court that sits in Washington. And so he goes now to Chief Justice Marshall, say, you know, what happened to my client's justice of the peace thing? And Marshall is not going to say, boy, I left it on the desk. Guess I never got around to it. No, he's no longer going into that particular office to see what happened to it. And so another thing that happens, by the way, is in 1802, the Republican Congress, in eliminating judgeships, also says the Supreme Court doesn't have to meet at all in 1802. You know, they can meet again in 1803. So there's a long gap between the Supreme Court sessions here. And in this meantime, William Marbury has gone to the court to try to find out what's happening with his justice of the peace ship. By the way, the case I'm outlining to you now is one of the most important in American history. And many of you, I suspect, may wind up going to law school. And when you get to law school, you're going to need to remember this case. But what I am telling you isn't going to be what law school is interested in you knowing. There is a simple phrase you should know about Marbury versus Madison, and I probably won't mention it today. So you'll have to go to law school to find that out. Okay, so here is the case. The court's not going to meet. And by the way, one thing Chief Justice Marshall does that is really smart is back in the 1790s, the court hadn't really sat and met together as a court. Cases would come before it. They would hear arguments, and then each judge would go and write his opinion, and then it would be up to you as lawyers to figure out what all of this meant. And it wasn't as though this court was overwhelmingly busy. There weren't that many cases that were coming through the federal judiciary. And the federal judges also sat as circuit court judges or district court judges, and now they have to do that again under this new regime of economy and government. Anyway, Marshall says the court will sit together and we will read our opinions. So it's not each judge's opinion written, it is the court speaking with one voice. And so in February of 1803, when the court meets again, Chief Justice Marshall is in a real dilemma here, because this guy, Charles Lee, had come demanding that the court, saying, my client's commission is sitting on Secretary of State Madison's desk, and Madison should deliver it, because under the law, William Marbury is entitled to be a justice of the peace. And Madison is holding up the delivery of the commission. And so what do you do if you're Chief Justice Marshall? This is a much trickier question. What do you do if you're Marshall in this case? Yes, Jovan.
I believe it's been a while since I looked at this case, but I believe the situation was that you can't just go to Marbury and say, yes, you should be a justice of the peace. Jefferson has to make you one, because Jefferson can just ignore you. Exactly. And if he does, you have a constitutional crisis on the third presidency, and it's really bad.
Exactly. So here is what could happen, exactly as Jovan had outlined it. So let us suppose the Chief Justice Marshall says to Mr. Marbury, yes, you should be a justice of the peace. And he issues what is called a writ of mandamus, an order on Secretary of State Madison that he deliver William Marbury's commission. You know, it's what Lee and Marbury want Marshall to do. And what happens then? So Marshall issues the order, and you think Madison's going to deliver the commission to William Marbury and say, gee, I'm sorry, I found it on the desk after all? Or conversely say, hey, if Marshall had actually delivered it, we wouldn't be in this problem. So Marshall knows that, yes, Marbury is entitled to his commission because it was signed and sealed, and the president can't then withhold it. On the other hand, if the court issues an order and the secretary, by the way, when Chief Justice Marshall had asked Madison, had written to Madison saying, you know, you should deliver the commission, do anyone know what James Madison had done in response? I know I've asked you before, what would James Madison do It's usually what I think about whenever I'm trying to do something. Madison's response is very much what your response is to the question. Doesn't do anything, doesn't acknowledge it. So Marshall knows, okay, I've written to Madison. Madison's ignored me. If I issue an order, will Madison then acknowledge that? Probably not. So it's really a bind for Marshall. And the great thing about Marshall is he is also, like Jefferson and Madison, a very savvy politician. And he understands his role here. He understands that of the three of them, one has been elected president. One seems to have the support of a majority. The Chief Justice, of course, was appointed by the guy who was voted out of office. He doesn't have a whole lot of political standing. So his options are limited, but he also understands the nature of what he's doing in terms of the constitutional roles of the three branches. The administration's overwhelmingly popular. The political party, which Marshall had represented, is all but gone. They had been annihilated. In 1800, they had been voted out of office. And then in 1802, they lost even more seats in Congress. As it turns out, Jefferson's idea of cutting back on government spending and eliminating taxes turns out to be wildly popular. And I should tell you that generally those are going to be popular things if you're looking for a political career anyway. So, Hamilton is still cranking out the New York Post. And by the way, in his annual message of 1802, I'm not going to read you Jefferson's second annual message. He doesn't propose any new things because we've already done everything we needed to do. We've cut government spending. We've eliminated all these unnecessary things. Now we can just let everyone free to pursue their own private pursuits of industry and improvement and, not hurt one another. And it's actually one of the great annual messages because he's not, usually it's a laundry list of things we are going to do and keep track of how many actually get done. So they had overturned the internal taxes and so on. By the way, there's this feeling under Jefferson, at least among his supporters, that it's not just a change of administration. This is an end of history. Gallatin had written to one of the letters between Jefferson to Jefferson from Gallatin says, "I hope history will have little to say of your administration." Boy, that's an interesting thing to say. History won't have anything to say because essentially we're not doing the bad things that fill up history. Anyway, so Marshall understands he is really in a bind. He can't rally popular opinion in behalf of William Marbury. By the way, does anyone here really care about William Marbury not being a justice of the peace? If you happen to be William Marbury, maybe one of you is a Marbury descendant, you've probably been grading about this now for more than 200 years. The rest of us see this as a you problem rather than an us problem. And the fact that we don't have 40 justices of the peace in Washington, D.C., that seems reasonable enough to us. So Marshall reads his opinion from the bench on the 24th of February of 1803. And he begins actually with what seems like a political speech. It's a lecture to the administration on how badly it has been fulfilling its basic duties. That is, Mr. Marbury was duly appointed to his position, and his commission was signed by the president and sealed by the Secretary of State. But then the current Secretary of State had neglected to deliver it. This is either incompetence or it's malfeasance. It's a really stunning critique of the Jefferson administration by the Chief Justice. And then the Chief Justice says he really should get his commission, and the court really should issue a writ of mandamus ordering the Secretary of State to give the commission to Mr. Marbury. But the court can't do that. And the reason the court cannot do that is because it does not have the power to do so. A writ of mandamus is a power that an appellate court has. It's not a power a court of original jurisdiction has. So if you go to court and your case then is decided and then appealed, the appellate court can issue a writ. The original court cannot. Because Mr. Marbury's lawyer had come to the Supreme Court first, it was the court of original jurisdiction. However, the Constitution spells out the original jurisdiction of the Supreme Court. And this is a fairly specific list of things the court can do when it is a court of original jurisdiction. And that's Article 3 of the Constitution, where it says in what cases the court will have original jurisdiction. In all cases in law and equity arising under the Constitution, the laws of the United States and treaties, and to all cases affecting ambassadors, other public ministers and consuls, to all cases of admiralty and maritime jurisdiction, to controversies to which the United States shall be a party, to controversies between two or more states, between citizens of different states, between citizens of the same state claiming lands, and so on and so on. So it has set out original jurisdiction of the court. The writ of mandamus was given to the court by Congress under the Judiciary Act of 1789. Actually, Section 13 of the Judiciary Act of 1789 gave the court the power to issue writs of mandamus. And now Chief Justice Marshall says that section of the Judiciary Act of 1789 violated the Constitution. The Constitution had set the original jurisdiction of the court. The Congress cannot expand it. By the way, here's a question I know no one will know. Who wrote the Judiciary Act of 1789? Here's a better question. Do you think President Jefferson really cared about Section 13 of the Judiciary Act of 1789? No. No one had thought about it in 14 years now. And here, Charles Lee had told Chief Justice Marshall, look, under the Judiciary Act of 1789, you have the power to issue writs of mandamus. And Marshall very closely looks at the Judiciary Act, also at Article 3 of the Constitution, and he realizes he is off the hook. He doesn't have to, because the Constitution stipulates what is the original jurisdiction of the court, and the things Congress had added in 1789 are not there. So I'd like to issue a writ of mandamus. Marbury really deserves his justice of the peace ship, but I can't. Judiciary Act 1789, unconstitutional. And so Marshall really, this is one of the most brilliant decisions in the history of the court, as Marshall uses the opportunity to lambast the administration, but then says, because imagine if he said, yeah, they've done a terrible job, you have to issue the writ, Madison would have ignored it. And then where does that leave the court? No, they don't have any, as Hamilton had said in Federalist number 78, they have neither force nor will. So Marshall knew that. By the way, Oliver Ellsworth was the author of the Judiciary Act of 1789. And if he was still alive in 1803, I'm sure he didn't lose any sleep over having that declared unconstitutional. It is, as you will learn in law school, the first time the court finds an act of Congress unconstitutional, but it's an act of Congress no one was thinking about. And by the way, the court had also found acts of Congress constitutional. And if they can find things constitutional, they also can find them unconstitutional. So that is Marbury versus Madison, notwithstanding that Jefferson doesn't have to issue the commission. He's furious about the decision because of the way Marshall has presented it. And of course, the ringing phrase from this is, it is emphatically the duty and province of the court to say what the law is. And in this case, the law is William Marbury does not get his commission because the Judiciary Act of 1789 was unconstitutional. So that's all for today. We'll be back on Wednesday with more adventures in the Jefferson administration, and I will see you then.
Have a good day, Professor.
Take care. Good to see you.